Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. And today we have something special, which is an interview with none other than Sarno, the community manager for Last Epoch, also known as the Master of Puns. So Sarno, thanks so much for being here. And yeah, how are you doing?
My pleasure. I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me, and I promise to keep the puns to minimum because you did explicitly say to me yesterday that you don't like them. So,
I mean, I just don't always get them, and it's not my type of humor, I suppose. I don't know, but feel free. I'm sure other people do appreciate the puns. I see that in the forums and everything. So yeah, that's not a that's not a problem.
I'll,
So
I'll sneak in one or two, see if you notice.
yeah. See if I pick up on them. It's just hard sometimes, right? With English not being a native language, and then sometimes I think like, is that a pun or is that just a sentence?
Or is that a reference to something? Did I not
Yeah.
see that movie?
Yeah. Did I see that movie? I'm not sure. Like the Gladiator one you made yesterday, I was like, the ardent Gladiator? Yeah, okay, fine. All right. Hey, Sardo, tell us a little bit about yourself so we get to know you a little better. We know you from the forums and like from the puns, like the ardent Gladiator. But yeah, how did you end up at 11th Hour Games, for example?
Um, it's my first community management gig. I've kind of flirted with similar things in the past. I was a MVP on Blizzard's forums at one point, went to Community Summit, and that was really insightful because they were just explaining, for example, when they respond in a thread, and they explained why sometimes when it's the big topic of the day and there's a huge controversy, they kind of lean back because you get a blue post in the thread, and then it's like, why are you posting in this thread? And not this PvP balancing that I care about, and it just kind of derails the thread. So one of the things we try to do at EHG is keep in contact with folks and discuss things with the community on a daily basis. But sometimes you just kind of have to see how a discussion goes without weighing in. So that's one thing I learned from that. A few people might know me from the PoE community. I actually found out about Last Epoch through the PoE forum. There was a post in the off-topic section, and checked out the game. Was interested in the skill system. Decided I'm going to see where this project goes, and ended up reaching out to game director Jude Kobler and saying, "Hey, don't know if you've a CM, but I'd be interested in joining the team." So he took me on, and that was very early 2018, so slightly over 2 years ago, and been a crazy ride since. Uh, Doing really well, but I have to be honest and say the Kickstarter was one of the most stressful times of my life.
Yeah, I can imagine because the Kickstarter, if I remember correctly, I also jumped in later, about a year ago personally. So I bought the game basically when it went early access in that was last year, right? So April 2019.
Yeah, that's great.
Uh, that is when I picked up the game, and I picked it up because I'm pretty sure I either saw Ziggy D or Zizaran, who I regularly watch. I saw them play that game, play Last Epoch, and it looked interesting and fun. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's really a game that I could play a lot of and maybe make content about. Although that was really not the intention from the start. I just wanted I just wanted a new game, and yeah, so that's how I picked it up. But you started the Kickstarter, I think, April 2018, right?
Yeah, it was in April of that year, if I remember correctly. And the one thing with Kickstarter is you have to set the duration before it starts. And if you don't get enough, you get nothing. There's actually a 2 week payment handling process after it comes to an end. So there's really tension there. So that was one of the reasons we said, hey, for the Kickstarter, let's not just show up and be like, hey, we've some napkin mat. We reckon we can create a video game. We
Yeah.
showed up with a demo. We'd actually been releasing, well, I wasn't on the team at the time, but they'd been releasing demos since late 2017. And we showed up to the Kickstarter with the demo. We were updating it throughout the campaign. One of the great things about that stage of development was we were more agile than we'd ever been, and like we could get feedback, and in very rare cases, admittedly, there'd be an update the next day that acted on that feedback, and that really helped kind of communicate that we want to take the community with us on this journey, and that I think helps get people interested in the game, because there's always Kickstarter campaigns saying, "Hey, we haven't done any of the work, but if you give us the money, we'll figure
Yeah.
stuff out." But we spend some time just so people could have a vertical slice of what Last Epoch could one day become. And then we threw out every zone and the passive system. And in maybe August of that year, if I remember correctly, we entered alpha stage of development.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is something that is still true for 11th Hour Games is that you guys seem to have a clear idea of what you're doing. And I mean, I'm following and covering sometimes some other games as well, where, yeah, that is at the very least questionable, right? You're like, what is the vision of this game actually? Like, where do you guys want to go? And I never really have that with Last Epoch. So the story you tell about the Kickstarter also makes sense to me. I wasn't there, but I can imagine you guys showed up prepared like you usually do, and then yeah, take the community along, which I think still shows in the way that you do the patches and new updates and communications. So that's great to see.
It can be a difficult balance. I do sympathize with other companies because, like, you have this situation where on one extreme you're accused of ignoring feedback, and on the other it's like, do you guys even have a vision for the game? And we try and strike that balance. Like, we had a different passive system, as I mentioned, back in the Kickstarter demo days, and it was actually received very well. Most of the feedback was positive, but most of the feedback was, wow, this is so innovative. I've never seen anything like this before. And we're kind of going through feedback saying, so where do people say this system would be great and I'll still enjoy it 5, 10 years from now? Everyone was kind of like, it was very, not superficial analysis, but it's very first impressions. I haven't seen anything like this before. And I'm happy about that. But that wasn't necessarily saying this will be part of the next great ARPG. So the system was you two kinds of points, and if you spent a point on, say, one axis, you'd gain a larger area of control, and within that area of control, you could invest points into nodes. But you couldn't just take any node you wanted. You had to kind of plan which direction you take your area of control and how you'd expand it. And in the system we migrated to, originally there are going to be two mastery classes per base class. We currently have three, and you can spend some points in all three. So you still have these three areas, and every 5 rows or so, there's nodes you can invest points into. So it's kind of taking the vision for the original system, but packaging it in a better, more polished way. And I think that's just one example of kind of having a vision, listening to feedback and saying, okay, how can we still execute against the vision, but improve the quality of the game?
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand that. And how do you, especially as a community manager, you read all the, well, I suppose all the feedback that you can find probably on like Reddit and the forums, and how has community feedback changed over the years, and has it even changed over the years?
I think there's not been a huge change in the way feedback is given, but there's kind of product life cycles. Prior to the Kickstarter, the community of Last Epoch was incredibly small because, like, there wasn't a marketing budget, and the people who were there really wanted to be there, and there really wasn't toxicity back in the day. As the game becomes more mainstream, you get people who show up, they buy the game, they're kind of interested in it, but, like, it's not this super passionate, small, core, tight-knit community anymore, and that's when things can, let's just say, require greater amounts of moderation. With Blizzard, with Path of Exile, those games are more mainstream, and they have larger communities, and some of those people are incredibly passionate, and you might see somebody who only plays Path of Exile or only plays World of Warcraft, but there's a lot of people who the game just isn't as important to them, and that reflects in the feedback they give and whether it's a bit superficial or just whether they're not perhaps as well mannered as they could be. I think
Yeah.
it's very much, each individual game has a kind of life cycle and feedback changes throughout that life cycle, but I'm not sure if I'd say there's any big trends in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, because I'm asking because you hear from other indie developers when you just talk about like how people these days perceive games, that they're much more vocal as communities about changes and much more harsh in their criticism, which I also sort of see if I just look at forums. I read things. I'm like, I'm not sure I would have read this like 15 years ago, but maybe I just forgot about 15 years ago, and maybe it was there back then as well. So
I,
I'm wondering if you see something similar in that regard.
I think the venue where you see feedback has changed. Like if somebody posts feedback on a subreddit for a game, that's very visible and lots of people know how that person feels about the topic they posted about. Some people say there's big changes in the way people provide feedback, but I think, as is kind of the case with technology as a whole, we're much more connected, so we're much more aware of how people behave. But I'm not necessarily sure I agree that that means the way people behave has fundamentally changed.
Hmm.
We just have greater insight into it now.
Yeah, yeah, and if you look at this from a Last Epoch perspective, I would say that like you mentioned, the sort of core community started off maybe then 1.5 years ago. Um, but still, when I read the forums, which I do almost every day, I see a very well-mannered community, sort of like well-moderated community. It's one of the nicer communities out there for sure.
I like to think so, but I definitely think you have a kind of honeymoon period while a game is in early access, and then when you reach release, it turns into a whole different ball game at that point.
Yeah. So do you expect this also to change significantly then?
I think there'll just be many more people, and there'll be lots of different personalities, lots of different perspectives. I don't think things will trend towards worse. You'll just have more of every kind of person at that point. So it's not that we've never moderated somebody on the forum, but it's definitely not something we do every day. It's definitely not something we even do every week. But, probably proportionately, it'll be a similar percentage of bad eggs, shall we say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
But
just more of them.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so the more of those you have, the more they can kind of taint the impression of a forum or kind of drag things down to their level. But
Yeah.
we always try and let people, we always say it's totally fine if you hate on the game. Go ahead, hate on the game, but don't hate on the people behind other forum posts. There's a line: criticize the software, not the people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is I think how it should be as well. And what if you would describe your job? Like what is your best and worst part of the job?
Ooh, that's interesting. The best part of the job is definitely seeing people experiencing the game for the first time and seeing what they like about it, what they don't like about it, because World of Warcraft was at its most special to me when I walked into Stormwind for the first time, and I was just thinking the size of this place, and it can be difficult to have a game kind of hold on to that sense of wonder when you know it so well, and when you're walking on a game behind closed doors, that's even more a factor than if it's just a game you played for hundreds or thousands of hours. So seeing that steady drip of new people joining the community, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, but just that sense of exploration, and they're figuring out the skill system because they've never seen it before, and they're figuring out stuff like the Monolith of Fate because they haven't seen that before, and it just really helps the game hold on to that sense of magic for me in a way, which wouldn't be the case if it's just me playing the game that I've already played for at least hundreds of hours at this point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You kind of live vicariously through them.
Yeah, I understand. And the worst part?
Um, we are an international group, and we've a Monday group ride meeting that begins at 1 a.m. where I live, so that's not the most enjoyable thing. Uh, so
Yeah.
It's great because there's always people around on the team. Like, it's a very rare day you show up to the community Discord and there's just like nobody with 11-hour games role there. But
Yeah. Yeah, I guess
it's
that's the
difficult because
advantage.
you balance the local time zone with the company's official time zone, and there's pros to that and there's cons to that.
Yeah. And because the main company, you could say, is based in Texas, so that is what, like 6 hours earlier than your UK time, I think.
Later, yeah. 6
Yeah,
hours later.
for you it's 6 hours
Oh,
later.
sorry, yeah, earlier. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're
Yeah.
right.
We're already messing up time zones, but it's just fine. That was yesterday the issue as well.
Yeah.
And what about the other side of the world? Because do you also have developers more on, let's say, the Asian side?
Not necessarily Asia specifically. There are a few people going in the other direction who live in Russia. We've
Mm-hmm.
several artists in Russia. Sergey, the guy who does
Sergey,
most
yeah,
of our concept art, so the skeletons, for example,
yeah,
um,
skeletons.
he's
Yeah,
Russian. He lives in Russia, and that has implications in terms of time zones as well. So sometimes, you've somebody in Canada who's like 8-hour time difference for me, and they want to speak to an artist. There's kind of a short window during the day where
yeah,
it kind of works for both of them. But we also have a lot of meetings throughout the week that happen at set times. And one of the strengths of that is if you want to connect with, say, artists, there's one day a week that they'll be around a specific time, and you don't have to be around that time yourself every day hoping to catch them. Like Wednesday, 10 a.m. company official time, be there, you'll connect with them. So that helps a lot.
yeah. I totally understand. So talking about a little bit on how the company works. So what I was interested in is how the current COVID-19 pandemic, the whole thing, has impacted you. Because if I listen to this, you were already working at least partly, well, not maybe remote, but at least not in the same office. Because those guys are in Texas, you're in the UK or Ireland, Sergey in Russia. So had that changed? Has that changed a lot?
We've definitely been sheltered from it much more than most teams. I definitely have a lot of respect for companies that have always been in an office. The infrastructure operates on the assumption they will be in the office, and suddenly it's like, hey, you can't go there anymore. You need to figure something out. And the community will be thinking, well, hopefully, they'll just carry on and everything will be normal. And they're scrambling behind the scenes thinking, right, how can we get this to work?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I would say from a work standpoint, it hasn't affected us in that capacity. In a personal capacity, it has, because at the end of the day, when you leave EHG stuff to one side, we're individuals, we're dealing with it in a personal capacity. Uh, I took a week off work because I lost a member of my family who died with COVID-19. So I wouldn't say we're not affected, but the company as an entity hasn't necessarily been affected.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that, by the way.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So talking a little bit about the how work is done within 11th hour games, because what is sort of apparent to me is that you guys have developed a very steady workflow over there. Because what we've seen from basically when I started following the game like over a year ago is that there's a constant stream of patches coming out. And not only that, it's also that these patches usually contain quite a bit of content. There's always a significant amount of new stuff in those new updates. And so I'm just trying to figure out like how do you guys work over there, and how do you make sure that you're bringing out these like quality patches with full of content, really. Also, if you look at the next one, like 0.7.8, you've already posted like 9 previews of completely different things, from music to stashes to skeletons, a whole new chapter.
I'm going
Uh,
to volunteer information. The date for that patch actually went back by a week, and I've kind of set this expectation of I'll be posting every day. So I'm sweating bullets.
no. No, I'm not. I'm just wondering, like, how is this gonna? How do you guys work in 11th hour games to make sure that you keep up this sort of pace and this kind of quality?
So the way the company is structured has a lot of advantages because if you're saying, right, I'm starting a company, there's going to be one office, it's going to be in this city, anyone not willing to commute here or move here or already living here is out of consideration. You're kind of starting off as a startup and you're cutting off a lot of very talented people from consideration. The way we have things, there's no real time spent commuting back to and from work. So we have more hours in the day productively working on the game directly rather than working on work, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I never spend 2 hours in a traffic jam saying, well, this isn't me doing one of my hobbies. This isn't me spending time with my partner. This is, it's kind of work, but no work is being done at the same time. So that helps a lot. We can collaborate online and just standard stuff, GitHub. We actually use Discord ourselves. One of the Kickstarter perks was people being able to join the team Discord, and there's certain dedicated channels that they have, mostly mirrors of what's in the community Discord. So general discussion, ask the devs, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's actually one reason we generally ask that people don't ping us in the community Discord, and we hate, kind of
Yeah.
we never mean to snap at people or anything, but if I see a ping notification on Discord, I always think it's my boss, there's an
Yeah. Yeah.
emergency,
Yeah. Yeah.
something's on fire. And then it's somebody like, hey, Sarno, can an enemy have more than one stack of bleeding? And I kind of think, well, maybe I didn't need
Yeah.
to be pinged for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Or when is
like
the
I
rogue
get there
coming?
and Stormquake has already answered the question. So it's not
Yeah.
even that I'm showing up and I'm helping with a pretty easily answered question. Like I show up to a question that's been answered and think, okay, well, back to what I had been doing. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of advantages just to being able to work not just through standard hours, but one of the things that happens is if you have an office and that office is closed on the weekend, you can't work on the weekend. You'll often see people on the weekend with 11-hour games roll. We generally interact with the community 7 days a week. There's members of the
Yeah. Yeah.
team who do typically work, 5 full days a week, and then there'll be one or two that might be half days, or they might have 6 full days, 1 half day that week, and that's one of the ways the pace of development is as high as it is. We just really put a lot of time into this because we know we have pushed the game back from its original launch window, and there comes a point when you need to say, okay, there's a deadline. We're going to actually release the game.
Yeah.
And often in a more traditional relationship, there'd be a publisher involved, and they'd be the one saying, right, you've X amount of money. The deadline is this. Please actually release something one day. And the
Yeah.
devs would be like, oh, we can make this game so much better. And the publishers are thinking, but it's good now.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. That's
we
the
ha-
that's the eternal struggle on that end, and but even I mean, indie games that publish their own games, you could sort of tell when they run out of money and they have to release the product, right, at some point in time, because there's just not enough cash flowing in anymore. So they release the game and then they still work on it, but then it's a released product. So I was actually really happy that you guys decided to not release in April, because we're now already 2 months past April, and there's still quite a bit of stuff to be done, in my opinion. Even though the game is a really good game, so I'm glad that it's now going to be like Q4 instead of April. But when did you guys internally figure out, like, okay, this April deadline is going to be a bit of an issue?
Probably later than I'm entirely happy about some respect because you go to Kickstarter and you have to have some idea. You can't be like, I don't know, maybe 2025. You have to be able to tell people, look, this is when we're aiming for the game to be finished. So we had everything kind of penciled in as timelines. Here's how long we reckon that this will take. Here's how long we reckon that will take. And there was some kind of padding. So, we'll spend this time acting on feedback. Don't know what the feedback will be. If we did, we wouldn't get that feedback because we'd have proactively worked on it. But one of the things we noticed was expectations for the game rising higher than what we had originally envisaged quite early on, because everyone wants to work on the game that everyone plays, people play for tens of years afterwards. Like people playing Diablo 2 today. Diablo 2 is not released in the last few years.
Yeah,
And one things you have to do when you're an indie team, when you're going to Kickstarter, is kind of say, okay, let's be realistic, let's make compromises. And we found ourselves in a position where we could kind of release what we had expected Last Epoch to look like at 1.0, or luckily we were in a position where we had the security that we could push things back and both polish the game more and also just have more things in the game for 1.0. And if you notice what has been kind of happening around the original release date is we released idols, we released shrines,
Yeah.
and we didn't want to say, hey, look, we promised there'll be extra stuff in the game because we pushed the date back. We wanted to show people. So those are things that weren't on the roadmap, that weren't envisaged back in 2018. But because we had that extra time, while we're not just going to allow, feature creep to blow out the next release date,
Yeah.
we do have certain windows in which to use that opportunity to add something to the game. And we wanted to show people, the game will be better at 1.0 than it would have been. And I think when we're communicative and transparent about that, nobody wants to hear, hey guys, good news, release date is what we said it would be. We're just going to engage crunch mode now, come out the other side, and that's 1.0.
Yeah.
And there had been the expectation that towards the last few months there would be a lot of crunch, and we just decided, do we have to do this? Will the game be better if we do this? And we looked at the relationship with the community and said, we have a pretty good report here. I think if we explain how long we're delaying it and why, people will be pretty understanding, and that is what we saw. If you go to that forum chat and scroll down, people were incredibly
Yeah.
supportive.
I think the majority, if not like 95%, were just saying that they were glad that this decision was made, including myself. Yeah.
And we just felt really lucky that we were in a position where we could say, can we keep going for that additional time without that surge in revenue you get at 1.0? And we really think the game will benefit long term because of it. Critics' reviews will be much better because we've had that extra time. That means more people buying the game and checking out. That means larger community. That means more people to play with. That means we get more money to invest into the game, into post-release support. So we just felt there was a
Yeah.
very compelling argument for it. So
Yeah. And I think that if you have, like, say, a good story and a good argument, and most of the community is already playing the game and can see that, if you would release this in 2 months' time, because I think you made the post in February, if I'm not mistaken, and it was
I,
supposed to
I
release.
think it may have been December.
Oh, it was much earlier even. All right.
I feel it was
Yeah,
December.
could be. Um,
I'm
but
pretty sure
the,
the team decided we wanted that news out there just so we could have
yeah.
Christmas and New Year's without that holding over us. Just our families enjoying themselves and us being like, "Oh God, how will the community react?" So yeah,
Yeah. I understand. Yeah. But I think the community in general also saw the benefits, and I think what really helps is that also up until that point in time, you guys have just been like dishing out a regular content at a steady pace. Although, yeah, but you could argue that it just wasn't enough for a successful, or, well, maybe a release that it could have been, like what you're just describing. So yeah, I think for both sides, people are happy that the game was delayed, which is not always the case, right? So I think you guys did a good job over there. Hey, we talked a little bit about Path of Exile, and more than a little bit about Last Epoch. What I noticed about Path of Exile is that there are quite a few, let's say, more established streamers and content creators from Path of Exile interested in Last Epoch. And not only interested, I know that at least Zizarin talks on his stream that he has some regular calls with you guys, with the developers, to help you out with developing the game, or at least give his opinions on the game. And you see people like Ziggy D, he designed the Unique. Q Dog is streaming this game every now and then. He's just really enjoying it. I'm wondering if you can tell a little bit more on how someone like Zizarin is helping you guys create a better game without, let's say, creating maybe the next Path of Exile. Or maybe you want to create the next Path of Exile, but yeah.
we have been in contact with Ziz. He has played the game, and there's a unique one-handed axe in the game that's a reference
Yeah,
to him.
the undisputed. Yeah,
I think you might be thinking of Carve to some extent when you talk about working with streamers. I know Carve officially joined the team as QA. We do get into design discussions with some streamers like Scissor and Ziggy D, just because they've spent so much time playing ARPGs,
right.
and you can't just design a game around the expectation that somebody will play for at least 8,000 hours. But you need that balance of people who don't necessarily have as much time to play games and people who just have played ARPGs to that extent that they know the current king of the genre and other competing games like the back of their hand. And it's incredibly invaluable to just see how they feel about things such as, how much development time goes into attracting new players, making the game easier to pick up, which they're usually much more supportive of than people
Mhm.
might first think, because you think, oh, well, they're already involved, they don't care, but they love seeing new players join the game they're
Yeah,
passionate about.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so it's always great seeing those guys check out the game. They tend to be very good at giving constructive feedback just because I think what happens a lot of the time is they'll wait longer before giving feedback. They'll be streaming and they'll be keeping a conversation going. You know yourself, there's chat and there's kind of the expectation of interaction, and you can't just be silently musing what you think for 40 minutes.
No,
But often behind closed doors, they'll give feedback, and they might have played the game the day before, and they're kind of thinking about it. And maybe something happened that they didn't enjoy, but they'll try and figure out, why did I not enjoy that? What was the expectation? How did the game kind of
right.
surprise me negatively? So
So can you give an example of what some of the feedback was, for example, and how you guys incorporated that into Last Epoch?
I know there has been expansion of the passive system, particularly with you choosing a mastery class and you getting a pretty strong passive or two, or in the case of Necromancer, I believe three, um, and an active skill, and that just feeling like more immediate payoff. Because there's
Hmm.
definitely a point earlier in development when you would just spend that entire time in a UI window. And we ended up, adding a quest and better fleshing that out. And we might go back and add a bit more to it later in development. But there's definitely some feedback saying, hey guys, this could be really cool. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to happen in world. It happens in the UI. And in some respect, that makes it feel not real. So
Yeah, yeah,
we built that quest, we tried to incorporate it into the lore, and as a bit of a wink to the kind of people who'd been giving us that feedback, one of the NPCs involved in that quest is called the Forgotten Knight, and she's a reference to the Knight base class, which was ultimately replaced by the Sentinel, and then the Sentinel, which had been a mastery class at the time, was replaced by the Forge Guard mastery class, and that iteration on that base class and its mastery classes was driven entirely by community feedback. There are a lot of people saying, I'm a knight and I become a sentinel, and it kind of feels like nothing's really changed thematically. It's cool when you become a paladin and you're just this holy person when you
yeah,
become the
yeah,
void knight and you're using
yeah.
the power of void against itself. But the knight is this sword and board class, and then the sentinel is board and Sword and Board
Right.
2.0, and it's not exciting. So that was driven entirely by feedback. We didn't have that plan, and we listened to it. And we're like, okay, yeah, we can see how that'd be a bit underwhelming. So those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, I see, and I can also see sort of where that feedback is coming from because if you look at PoE, you have the labyrinth, right, that takes you through your ascendancy. And if you look at Path of Exile, which is obviously a game in development for about like 7, 8 years or something, um, and you see where that game is now, looking at Last Epoch, and let's imagine that also Last Epoch is going to stick around for a while. What is something that you would see in the current Path of Exile that you really hope Last Epoch achieves as well, or maybe already has achieved? And what is something that you hope it doesn't happen?
Oh, I knew that second question was coming as soon as you asked the first one. Um, so the first question, what it has achieved, um, I suppose when we look at the RPG genre, you could argue about where it originally began. There'd be some people, and this is definitely extending a bit outside of video games, but there'd be some people say, some of the origin lies with Dungeons and Dragons. There'd be some people saying the original Diablo. There'd be some people saying Diablo 2 was the first real ARPG. I think Path of Exile, which I think the devs have been pretty transparent about being something of a love letter to Diablo 2,
Yeah.
they managed to take that and succeed in writing that love letter while creating their own game with their own identity. It's not a carbon copy of Diablo 2. It's not a Diablo 2 remaster with a different IP done by a different company that didn't have permission to use the Diablo franchise.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It,
yeah.
Path of Exile is its own beast, and there are pros and cons to that. There are things I prefer about Diablo. There are things I prefer about PoE, but they have been able to tread that needle of it being a reference to Diablo 2, of it being inspired by Diablo 2, and it's just going in its own direction. So, you look at the skill tree and how they took that and went into the monstrous passive tree that has more nodes. Thank God
Yeah.
they tell you how many nodes, because I would never count.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
1,500
sure it's more.
apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So imagine trying to count all of those and losing your place halfway through.
Yeah.
So our approach to that was they went for the biggest possible skill tree. We said, well, let's go for skill first. Let's have each skill have its own tree. And that was our own take on being inspired by Diablo 2, but trying to create something ourselves, trying to create a skill system that hadn't been seen in the genre before. And it's inspired by Diablo 2, but it wasn't in Diablo 2. It wasn't in Path of Exile. And I'd like to see Last Epoch continue to be its own game while being able to take inspiration from games that have done really well for themselves, have really carved out their own niche, have really become their own very successful, very popular experiences, and just, learn what works, learn what doesn't work, see why things work or don't work, but never fall into the trap of just becoming a cheap clone of something else. And I'd be inclined to criticize the MMORPG genre. I think after WoW's success, you saw a lot of games that were World of Warcraft with a fresh lick of paint and a different IP, and a lot of them died because, quite
Yeah.
frankly, if you wanted to play World of Warcraft, you did.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was the game with the community and the content.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um,
Still, even to some extent, I mean, it's still got
absolutely.
millions of subscribers, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and now there's really kind of two of them with Classic as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I went back to Classic for a bit. But for me, it was more. This is completely off topic. But for me, it was much more like nostalgia. And I leveled a hunter to like, I don't know, 46. And then, but it took me a week or something, if not more. I was like, I don't have the time for this anymore. Like when I used to play this, I was, I think it was first year of high school or something, or like first year of college, not high school. So I was around like, I don't know, 17, 18. And I had tons of time. And it was that game, and it was amazing. I think it's honestly still one of the best games ever made. I've had so many good memories from raiding in World of Warcraft that are really hard to top. But yeah, I went back and I thought, yeah,
for
this,
sure, I went back, and one thing I did that I thought was kind of cool. My first character ever was a human warlock.
hmm,
So when I went to Classic, my only real character was a Forsaken warlock.
right,
So it's kind of, inspired by I'm bringing this character back from the dead. So let's
yes,
let's have him look the part. One thing I find fascinating about that community is like you write down the feedback on an expansion while it's the current expansion, and then you see how people refer to that expansion in the future. And whenever they're hating on whatever the
yeah,
company's trying to do at the time, it's always like, oh, but you had the formula perfect 2 years ago, and you look at that person's post and they were hating on the game 2 years ago.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
actually playing the entire time, it's like, well, they must be doing something right.
So I think feedback, and it ties into your example as well, is a tricky subject all by itself. So how do you guys generally handle that? Because you already told a bit like we're sometimes just waiting where the discussion goes, and I can actually see that in the forum. Like there are plenty of opportunities for you guys to pitch in and say it's going to be this, and in the meantime, there's like 46 posts on a or 46 replies on a single post. So how do you guys work with that?
It's kind of a case by case basis because you have to decide, will a post here be helpful? Are we clarifying something?
Hmm.
Or will this be seen as the authoritative response that kind of invalidates the purpose of other people posting? Because that's never a member of a company's goal.
Right.
But if you look at Threads staff posting, they don't have the same level of activity after that sometimes, unless there's just a lot of people, like maybe the employee said something the community really isn't happy about, and then there's a spike in activity. But often it just kind of feels like resolved. Like if people are giving feedback and staff are seen to respond, they kind of feel like, well, if I haven't already posted, I've missed the window. They saw the feedback, they considered it, they responded, the ship has sailed. So we try to avoid, closing the door on feedback unless it's just something that, maybe somebody's saying, "You guys should do this," and we look at it and we just think, "Well, that's not technically feasible, so let's post and be like, we love this idea. This is not something we're capable of doing when next year." Um, I'm you've been very kind because I know you asked me 2 questions about Part of Excel, and I answered one of them. Um, with regard to what they have I think the question was, what have they done that I hope we never do at Last Epoch?
Yeah, and I thought you were already referring to that with the skill system, with like the
No,
1500 nodes.
no, I was saying, I was
Because
saying that that was how they
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
took
Sorry.
Diablo 2's ideas and evolved on it, and that's why I think they did really well,
Yeah,
and that's something we try to do with our own skill system. With regard to what they've done that I hope we've never going to find ourselves in a position of having done, I think, and I kinda hate that this is personal and naming one particular person. Chris Wilson has personally spoken of his desire for, like, a director's cut of Path of Exile and a different version of the game, a slower version of the game. And obviously, it's amazing that it has attracted such a large community of people, but they're kind of creating a game for people other than themselves now. And in a way, that's called having a job. But in another way, you kind of think, well, how much of the vision of the game from 1.0 stuck around? And maybe it's a good thing that that's changed. Maybe they've learned lessons along the way.
yeah.
Maybe that's part of receiving feedback and considering it. But I'd love to see what his director's cut of Path of Exile would look like, and I kind of wonder, should they try and move things in that direction, or should PoE keep doing PoE things?
Yeah, and maybe we'll know the answer to that when PoE 2 launches, right? Because there at least I have some sort of opportunity to to fix some of the the power creep, I suppose, one of the most things, and also the speed, because I know they talk themselves also about the speed of the game. And I was recently so kind enough to be granted a headhunter from Cute Dog because he temporarily didn't need it, and I just don't have the time to grind for a headhunter and then everything you need with it to build a complete juicer over there. But I did a bit of some mapping with that, and then you just realize like this game is out of control, right? This makes no sense anymore. I am just like, you can only see my feet on the screen of the character because it gets so bloated, because it steals all those modifiers from the monsters. And I'm incredibly fast clearing maps within 40 seconds sometimes. Uh, I'm wondering how PoE 2 is going to tie into this, and if they are able to maybe slow things down a bit and maybe limit the power creep a bit.
I'd be curious to see that myself for sure, because there's going to be 2 campaigns. You're going to be able to
Yeah,
choose which one you.
exactly. Yeah,
If there's the one you blast through in a few hours and the one that takes a week to complete, there's going to be only one that gets played.
true.
So
Yeah,
I kind of wonder if that's really going to be them slowing down the game, or if that's just, breathing fresh life into it. They are making some significant changes to like their skill system,
true.
disassociating that from
Yeah,
gear. So
yeah.
it'll be interesting for sure. People ask about, do you think that'll be when they slow the game down? And I look at what I perceive as maybe making it easier to get a certain power budget through the skill system by removing it from gear, and I think maybe that's not the direction they're going in.
I'm just curious to see how it goes, and I'll be playing it for sure. I've picked up, I think, Path of Exile a couple of years ago. Definitely not from the start, but I play most of the leagues since a year, and I'm always enjoying myself a lot with the first month, and after that I'm sort of done with it, and that's totally fine because first of all I have videos to make, and now we have Last Epoch, which I keep enjoying, mainly creating new and new characters. That is my main enjoyment out of the game, and of course all the content around it and the videos around it. I think we'll have let's say one more topic to cover, and then we've spoken for a long time. So I actually want to end with what is probably going to be the real beginning of the game, which is the launch. And what I'm trying to get at is like, what are your hopes and expectations for the launch?
A smooth one would be nice.
A smooth one, yeah.
Yeah, so
Are you guys
that's my
gonna are you guys gonna buy like 400 servers?
well, I think one thing is that a lot of games that have rocky launches, they had enough servers, but like
Hmm.
maybe a database choked and died somewhere,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe a load balancer just fell over. So one of the things we're going to be looking at is monitoring tools and trying to spot problems, accepting that there will be problems, anticipating them, and just saying, how can we spot problems before symptoms start creeping up, and how can we try and fix them before they really get out of control? Um, so, that might look like saying, okay, we need to expand infrastructure here. Let's implement a login queue for 20 minutes that clears up shortly afterwards. But instead of things going down, that's us saying, hey, short queue, we're just doing this. So there is no outage. Um, hopes and expectations. It would be
Yeah,
good to arrive in a position where we look at 1.0, we say that went well. There's going to be some, hot fixes coming shortly afterwards because
yeah,
there's
for
going
sure.
to be so many people playing the game that there will have been things that were missed or that we hadn't considered that
Yeah,
is gets brought to our attention. But I think just being able to, within a brief period of time, steady the ship in that regard and then say, okay, let's start talking about the game's first cycle, which is our name for challenge leagues or seasons.
mhm.
Let's start talking, well, maybe not immediately, but let's start, really getting into the nitty gritty development of the game's first expansion and, just being able to move on from the launch and for people to have reasonably good experiences. We don't anticipate it being perfect just because there's so many factors to try and get right. But we know that if a game has a rocky launch, it can really burn people and they can just write it off mentally as, oh, I tried playing that game, it was garbage, I couldn't log in.
Yeah, yeah,
And the hope and expectation would be that as many people as possible have an experience that makes them think, I enjoyed my time playing on launch. I'm going to keep playing with my friends for a few months, see what the first cycle looks like, and just go from there. So have
no.
it be the best possible beginning to the game because ultimately 1.0 is much more beginning than an end.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Sarno, I want to thank you so much, man, for taking the time to talk with me and also with all the people that are listening. So thank you so much. Is there any last words from your end?
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I look forward to hopefully doing this again sometime.
Yeah.
And guys, if you're enjoying the Last Epoch content, consider subscribing.
Look at that. I don't even have to say my own line. All right, Sardo. We'll talk later and see you soon.
Have a good day, bud.